Earlier today, Joe Biden announced another major move aimed at forcing Putin's hand to end his war on Ukraine.
We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. This is a step that we're taking to inflict further pain on Putin, but there will be cost as well here in the United States. Americans have rallied to support their Ukrainian people and made it clear we will not be part of subsidizing Putin's war.
A war in which Putin's forces have killed hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians and forced at least 2 million people to flee their country, according to the UN. But many have stayed. And I'm not one to throw the word hero around lightly, but it's hard to imagine anyone more deserving than the many Ukrainians who've gone from a completely normal life to risking everything to defend their country, showing relentless courage in the face of overwhelming force. Ordinary heroes, as my next guest called them in a recent terrific Boston Globe piece, writing that they up the ante for the rest of us. When heroes are indeed just like us, the question, why not us, becomes exceedingly hard to answer. The woman behind that piece, Elizabeth Svoboda, joins me now. She's the author of What Makes a Hero, The Surprising Science of Selflessness. Elizabeth, great op-ed. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Thanks. You know, hero is arguably the most overused word in the English language, but not in these circumstances. Tell the story of Vitali Shakoon, who you mentioned at the top of your op-ed in the Boston Globe.
Yes, absolutely. So Vitali Shakoon, he was an engineer in a Ukrainian battalion, and his higher-ups had decided that there was this one bridge, the Hennichesk Road Bridge, that needed to be blown up in order to stop the advance of the Russian tanks. And Shakoon volunteered for that job, and he was going to have to put mines there to blow up the bridge. And he knew that in the process of doing this, it was incredibly risky. And unfortunately, he did end up losing his life in the process of blowing up the bridge. But as he wanted, he was able to slow down the Russian advance. So talk about putting yourself on the line for a larger cause.
Well, and also we've seen stories of hundreds, thousands, possibly millions of Ukrainians who are like Vitali Shakoon. Are you surprised by what you see in the Ukrainians, or based upon your research, is it predictable that they rise like they did here?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if I would say it's entirely predictable, but what we do know from the study of heroes is that most heroes are actually very ordinary people in terms of personality, often in terms of their occupation. They're not that different from the rest of us. They don't fit some superhero or set apart type of prototype. So in that sense, I think it's not surprising that when everything really is on the line, that when they are defending their countries and their families, that they step up. And some of them have been hailed on social media, millions of others will not, but they step up and get the most out of themselves and are the most selfless that they've ever been in their lives.
You know, you've written books, you've researched this. I haven't done any research. It's just sort of my gut reaction. It's one thing for me to see someone who reacts heroically without thinking like that guy years ago, the Vietnam veteran who jumped on top of somebody who had fallen into the subway tracks in New York City. Wesley Autry was his name. Covered the person with his body as the subway rode over them. It's another thing. These Ukrainians, it's not purely reaction. They think, and then they decide consciously to take risks, which is incredible to me. Is this genetic, or is it learned, or somewhere on the spectrum? What is it?
I think it's definitely a combination, but I would say I err on the side of this is behavior that can be trained and it can be learned oftentimes. And when we look at heroes, in their childhoods, they often have had very selfless role models, people that they have looked up to that shape their worldview. And I think you really have to have a worldview that is inclusive, that when you look at other humans, you see other people who are just as deserving and just as worthy of saving as yourself. And so it gives you that mindset that I'm going to put myself on the line for somebody else.
Well, if I could take that one step further, my sense of things was, if you earlier in your life have been helped yourself when you were suffering in some fashion, you're more likely to help others. Is that borne out by the research or no?
Yes, I think to some extent the research on that topic is still pretty early, but it has been borne out that when you go through something difficult and there's somebody who helps you come out of that the other side, that you are more likely to be motivated to want to help somebody else who's in really similar dire straits. And researchers actually call that altruism born of suffering. So it's actually this idea that by going through the hard times, what you learn from that, you are motivated to pass that on to somebody else. And that can be a really incredible effect.
You know, the thing that's really stayed with me from your op-ed, a number of things did, is you talk about when someone who is larger than life is heroic, it doesn't have as much an impact on you because it's sort of an arm's length kind of relationship, for lack of a better expression. But you go on to say when an ordinary person, like a Ukrainian, like a professor we saw on CNN, a retired professor who was building Molotov cocktails in her backyard for her neighbors to throw at the Russians, that kind of heroism from ordinary people is contagious. Is there evidence of that connection?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the science on heroism is early, but just in terms of social contagion, we do know that when somebody sets a moral example, and especially when you look at that moral example and you are impressed, and you kind of resolve over time to follow that can actually create behavioral changes. So the way I look at it with these Ukrainian heroes is they really are inspiring people and creating sort of this moral ripple effect that we don't even know where the end of that's going to be. And that is incredible.
Do ordinary people who become heroes or engage in heroic behavior, do they see themselves as heroes? I'm guessing they don't.
Almost universally, they don't. You're right. The ones that I've talked to, overwhelmingly, the message I get over and over again is, I just did what I felt like was the right thing to do in this situation. And I did what I hope somebody else might do for me if I were in that terrible situation. And so it's really about being able to take the perspective of somebody that's in trouble, to act when there's a principle that's under attack. I think that's what really makes the difference.
And does the doer, it seems to me when you do a good act, even if it doesn't rise to the level anywhere near these Ukrainian individuals, you also feel better about yourself. I mean, there is a spillover onto you, is there not?
Yes, absolutely. And I think over time, even when you make these small decisions like, okay, I'm going to speak up for somebody at work that's being bullied, or okay, I'm going to call out this corrupt practice that's happening at work, that when you sort of practice in these small ways, that helps form your moral identity. And even down the line, it prepares you if you ever are in a situation where you need to step up in a really big heroic way, you're going to be more ready to do that. So I think it can be the snowball
Elizabeth,
effect.
I only have 30 seconds left. In addition to the contagious impact on me or Jane Doe as an individual, can the contagion affect a whole culture, as it seems to me it is affecting, for example, people in the United States, red, blue, and in between? Does that happen?
I think absolutely it is happening. It's happening within Ukraine. The ordinary heroism of individual Ukrainians is influencing others, driving more acts of heroism. And certainly there's a spillover effect into the US too. We are seeing more unity in our culture to a level that we haven't seen for quite some time. And that has been incredible.
Elizabeth Svoboda, your research and your writing is fascinating. And thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.